All right, welcome to this episode of our show, True Data Ops. I'm your host, Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior. In each episode, we try to bring you a podcast covering all things data ops with the people that are making data ops what it is today. If you've not done so already, be sure to look up and subscribe to DataOps.live YouTube channel, where you can find all the recordings from our past episodes. So if you missed any of last season's episodes, now's your chance to catch up. Now, my guest today is a longtime colleague and friend, Shawn Rogers. Shawn is an internationally recognized analyst, strategist, thought leader, speaker, and author specializing in artificial intelligence, machine learning, analytics, business intelligence, and cloud technologies. He co founded the online community BI Network and was VP of DMReview.com, one of the first online forums for the data management and data warehousing space. Currently, he's leading the international analyst firm BARC in their U.S. operations. Welcome to the show, Shawn.
Hey, Ken, thanks a lot for having me. I'm glad to be here. It's a good topic.
Yeah, and yes, I should also mention. I think we met probably through Boulder BI Brain Trust, right?
Probably.
Through
Yep.
Claudia Imhoff back in the day, and you still live in Boulder, right? In Boulder, Colorado.
I live just outside of Boulder. It's a great place to be.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I as you know, I used to live in Colorado. It's such a beautiful place, and for some bizarre reason, for a little bit of data warehousing trivia for the world here is back in the mid 90s when I got started in data warehousing, it seemed like Denver was like the epicenter for it because you had Bill Inman lived in the area, Claudia lived in the area, you lived in the area, I lived in the area, Dan Lindstedt lived there and developed Data Vault at Lockheed Martin in Denver, and we all met there kind of through this association, the Boulder BI Brain Trust. It was pretty exciting. None of us ever figured out why that was. Why did we all end up living in Colorado?
The joke was there was something in the water for sure.
Absolutely. So, obviously, I know your background, you know my background, all that, but some of our listeners probably don't. So, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of your background beyond what I said in the intro, and tell us a little bit also about Bark and what they are and what you're doing there.
Yeah, well, you did a great job on the background. Thank you. I appreciate that. BARC, as you mentioned, is an international analyst firm. I run the U.S. operations for the company. I specialize in the topics you mentioned, AI and ML, and data and analytics and cloud. And of course, those things are very fun and top of mind right now. My role is to extend the reach of the company. And the company itself, BARC, has been in the industry for nearly 25 years. And we have over 20 analysts covering the data and analytics space. So this is our specialty. We pay a lot of attention to topics like data management. So data ops fits right in there. So it's fantastic. As a company, we do a lot of research. We do advisory with end user companies and vendors alike. And we have events around the world. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I actually got to participate in a BARC event in Europe a couple of years back. I think it was actually during COVID, so unfortunately I didn't get to go in person. But if I remember correctly, it seems like they do the in-person one at like a castle in Germany, if I remember correctly.
That's a great one. Yep. I believe the one you're referencing is held in Würzburg, Germany. So yeah, I have been to that castle. It's quite beautiful. So in October we have a retreat coming up again in person, which seems to be the new direction everybody's going. So the online stuff is getting somewhat sunset these days, and everybody's kind of back to being together, which is nice. So.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah. All right, so let's jump in here. So I want to start off with, what are you seeing? I mean, you're working with an analyst firm. You've kind of been an analyst on and off. You've worked for some vendors over the years as well. But what are you seeing today in the data world? What's the hot thing that you were working on? And if you want to go a little off to the edge, what's hype?
Well, I want to say the word generative AI before you do, and just get that out there today, because
Yeah.
you can't have a conversation in this space without that term coming up. But AI in general is impacting the data world in really interesting ways, automating the work that companies are doing and helping things move faster. And I have to say, keeping up with the technology hasn't been this hard since Big Data and Hadoop kind of premiered on the scene. And I'll also add that this is 5 times harder and faster than that topic. So I think that that's probably one of the most exciting things. I think the other bit is when I talk to end users and their companies, they're trying to figure out how to mechanically or technologically keep pace. And that's maybe may not be new, but in a weird way, it's hot. It's everybody's trying to figure out, can I do these cool new things with the things I have? And in some instances, unfortunately,
the answer is probably no.
Is no, you cannot. And I even had a chat with a customer that I worked with as an analyst a few years back. And I said, you may recall during that meeting that I suggested that you focus here, here, and here. And the here, here, and here part was in their data foundation, in data quality and MDM practices and access and integration. And those things weren't necessarily the sexiest projects in the world to focus on. And so they often got put on the table, right? They got paused. And now companies are paying a price for that strategy from a few years ago. So I think that, new things that have happened is, real time has become very common. Whereas it used to be an outlier. Open source continues to power innovation in really cool ways. And that can go right back to generative AI and AI in general with all these great open source models and available public models. So yeah, it's kind of an exciting time to be in the space, but I haven't done so much reading in many years. If you miss a few days, you miss a few announcements. So that's the fun part.
Yeah, definitely harder to keep up than it was in the past, and that could be that we're slowing down because we are getting a little older, but it makes it much harder to keep up than when we were 20.
That's true. That's true.
And I think there's a curve there somewhere that we
There
probably
is.
could have a data chart that shows something, a correlation there. But
I hear that.
So from your perspective, what is data ops, and really how does it fit into this evolving landscape with Gen AI and everything else that's happening?
There's a lot of different ways to describe it, but I thought about that this topic would the direct question would come up, and for me, it's about powering analytics in a new world of data, and so it's kind of both ends of it, right? Data ops is what enables us to do things better and faster with more data in a more cohesive, governed, time to value sort of way. And that time to value thing has always been stuck in my head and has been a long time. You talked about that group we belong to in Boulder. Dr. Richard Hackathorn was a member of that group.
Yeah.
And Richard did a lot of writing on this topic of intersecting with the value of a decision. And if it had too much latency, the value dissipated over time. Data ops is what allows us to keep pace with value. Am I making sense?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because that kind of leads right to my next question: is where do you see automation playing a role, and whether or not is that critical to keeping up the pace and delivering the value? We'll go with that particular approach.
If you're not addressing the upside of automation in your architecture and in your data streams and in your business processes today, you won't be successful. You won't keep pace from a scale standpoint. So I look back on the data quality articles or the MDM articles or the data management pieces that we published in our print magazine in the early 90s. And it covered the important parts, and oddly enough, it's still very relevant today. It's I make a joke a lot when I get to talk on programs like this that everything old is new again.
I figured you were going to say that.
And I've said that. I say it a lot, but it really is true. It's in order to move fast, in order to meet the analytic needs and demands today, in order to innovate with AI, you have to have an incredible data foundation. And if you don't, things are just not going to go the way you want them to go. I feel like maybe in the older days, it was an opinion of us experts. us people who supposedly understood data, but it was, my point of view is almost nowadays it's evolved to a fact-based piece of information. If you don't have the right foundation, and DataOps is part of that, you don't get to do the fun things, period.
Yeah, well, and I think some of that might be the old hindsight is 2020. Is we've now got several decades behind us where we said this is true. You should listen to what we're saying, and then a bunch of people didn't, and now they're going, why is this stuff not working? Oh, we need to do data modeling. What? Data modeling? Isn't data modeling dead? No. There's been a resurgence in all of this. Data quality, data modeling, data. You mentioned data governance as part of data ops, and that's huge. I mean, especially with things like GDPR and CCPA. I mean, you got so much data. If you don't have governance and you haven't figured out how to automate some of that governance, there's just you're going to end up violating a rule somewhere.
The basic GDPR stuff, like right to know and understand why a decision was made on your loan application or your mortgage application. Many companies, perhaps even most still here in the US especially, are unable to answer cohesively a question like that because they don't have the governance, they don't have the data lineage, they don't really fully understand exactly how they made that decision on that Shawn Rogers applicant, and they have a very hard time of explaining it. And that governance aspect and the environmental aspect of managing your environment. I mean, they're things that have to happen, and that's kind of the common chorus that I tell my end users when I talk to them is, how are your data foundations? Are you doing data ops? What does that mean to you guys? And, and if you listen carefully, you usually get the first part of data ops. Like, well, yeah, we do a lot of ELT, ETL. I mean, yeah. And it's like, so let me explain to you that that's one part of the journey. Where are you at with the governance? Where are you at with collaboration? Are you enabling self-service? All of those things become pretty key to companies that are trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So where do you think we should expect to see more automation? I mean, I guess we could probably have a discussion on where should we see more automation, but where do you expect we'll see some more automation evolve here in the next year or two?
I'm seeing a lot of really cool stuff at the metadata layer. And I think data stewards in general, who've lived a very manual lifestyle for a very long time as subject matter experts on their data, they'll continue to play a role there. But I do think that automation and artificial intelligence are sticking their nose in that space pretty hard. I look at a lot of the big cloud platforms on an ongoing basis. We're in the midst here at Bark of doing a data management research project, end user driven, and looking at data catalogs and analytic databases and data platforms and cloud data platforms. And they're all sort of streamlining an awful lot of the AI automation in that data aspect of their platform, making it easier, making it faster, creating data pipelines to feed analytics in a smarter way. Gen AI plays a role, but it's more content creation and narrative, and I think that's really cool stuff at the other end of the spectrum. But the automation stuff that's happening around data is just fantastic, whether it be compliance based. I just saw a neat governance tool in a platform recently that would flag for the user, the self-service user, that you're about to touch data that is governed under GDPR. And I thought, and they do it in the process. While the individual is working to put together a project using a particular data source, and they immediately in the platform flag and say, hey, just so you know, there's some rules around this data. Or they're doing things like dynamic masking and things of that nature, which helps keep the end user out of trouble. We couldn't do this stuff 20 years ago. So this is exciting.
Yeah, no, that and the dynamic data masking and row access policies. When Snowflake added that into their platform, it's like, oh, this is great. This is what we've needed for a couple of decades.
I forgot who I was talking to, Kent. That was one of the vendors that was in my head while I was talking, because Snowflake, Elation, and a few other really great groups are in that.
That's what I figured. Yeah. No, and
they're doing smart stuff.
Yeah, and it's exciting to see that. I remember shortly after Frank Slootman joined Snowflake, and we had one of our Black Diamond councils. They came back from that, and it's like across the board, every one of our customers asked, "What are you doing about governance? We need better controls. We need more governance. We need more security." And that that dynamic data masking was part of it, and some of those technologies that are in there, especially when you started talking about data sharing and data marketplaces. It's like, okay, now we're opening up the old open the kimono, but not everybody has the right to see everything that's in there, and how do you? This again, part of the data ops is how do you make sure that when you're building, we'll use the modern term data product, when you're building a data product and you're selling it on a data marketplace, how do you make sure that the data that's in there is legally viewable and usable by the consumer, and making sure that the stuff that isn't really isn't, right? That it is masked or obfuscated or just flat not there, that it's filtered out. We used to do some of that in the Oracle world years ago with row-based filters, where I did when I worked at Denver Public Schools. We wrote reports for the principals. Well, they were only allowed to see the students that were registered in their school, and we were able to do that, so it knew who the principal was and automatically filtered the data. There was no way, no matter how they went into the database, even if they knew how to get into SQL Plus and write a query themselves, that they would ever see students that weren't in their school. And that took a lot of work back then. To get that to do.
Well, it did, right? It wasn't nearly as I don't want to call it simple, but it accessible. It wasn't nearly as accessible back then, for sure. And the other bit that we haven't really talked about, we talked about governance a bit, and this idea of marketplaces and collaborating with data, but kind of in the middle is sort of this idea, as you well know and have written a lot about, is testing and monitoring. The dynamics of data are changing in ways that they've never changed before. And one of my favorite examples is asking companies, what did you do to evolve with the data in 2020? And sometimes, and I tip my head on purpose, because sometimes you'll get an executive, what do you mean 2020? Like, specifically? Well, as we all know, the pandemic hit in March. Data changed dramatically. Do you have the ability to monitor how your data is evolving? Can you test the systems that are in place that are, around your data for clarity and accuracy? And can you test the models and all of that type of stuff? And it's again, that's where the new game lies. It's you have to be able to do those more sophisticated things. But I think closing the loop is a newer thing, and data ops brings that to the surface, in the sense of I think a lot of the data work that had been done in the past had been project-based, a single shot into the dark. I'm done with that. Now I'm moving on to something else. And it's like, if you're not holistically paying attention to your data ecosystem, I mean, especially with disruptive events like a global pandemic is a good example. But it's, the normal examples are seasonality and things of that nature that affect how our data evolves. So
and I think, to a certain extent, prior to the pandemic, I know I certainly worked with organizations, Snowflake customers at the time, that hadn't really thought about that before. And then when they started looking at it, they realized, well, even their data before the pandemic had things like seasonality to it that they hadn't been accounting for. So you've kind of moved us right into the conversation about the 7 pillars of true data ops, because one of the ones that, what you're talking about reminds me of the pillar around automated regression testing and monitoring, that is a critical component in order to manage this stuff. Because like you said, things are changing. It's like you test it. We used to do, what did we call it? It was unit testing, right? And then you had integration testing, and then you moved it to production. And then stuff breaks. Well, how did that happen? Well, because we weren't continuing, because we were testing the code, but we never tested the data that much.
Right. Yeah, I've had conversations with companies where you'll hear a sentence and it's a small slip, but they'll say, well, we did data quality.
Past tense.
Like,
Right.
yeah, we did that project. We spent the $500,000 and did a bunch of work on data quality. Really, when did you do that? 4 years ago. Okay.
And nothing's changed since.
All right. At the pace that people add data sources, at the expansiveness of the data ecosystem for companies, like we said, automation and kind of a full loop approach has to be a big part of it. So,
yeah. So let's talk about the 7 pillars a little bit. Which ones jump out at you?
I'm a big fan of the one that talks about collaboration and self-service, because it speaks an awful lot to the idea of true scalability on data, right? Through your analytic process. It hidden in those words of self-service and collab, that means there's templates. That means there's reusable processes. That means that there is pre-approved governed data sources. There's a way for me to move quickly, and more collaboration around data roles, I think, is also something that's often been kind of overlooked. I think we're all really familiar with the stories of data scientists who work in isolation down the hallway, and prying open data doors that they probably shouldn't, and accessing, and so on. And so you get a lot more from these types of functions when you have a collaborative platform or a collaborative organization, where you can reuse successful things from people that have come before you, and understand data in a smart way. So, I think that's one of my favorites. And then there's this other one in the group that talks about continuous integration, and
CI/CD. Yeah.
yeah, and CI/CD is, I just think it's like a must now. And this goes back to what we were just talking about. The dynamics of data evolve very quickly. If you're not constantly integrating and bringing new data in, and understanding that new data as it arrives, you start falling off. You fall behind competitively, and I said it early. I said one of the things that has changed in our world is like real time is like it's getting more common, and well, you can't do real time without that type of data ops functionality. If you're not continuously integrating data, you're going to have a hard time making the best decisions, the most informed decisions. And it's simple stuff all the way to the sophisticated. I gave a simple explanation a long time ago that if a company was smart, an airline was smart enough to continuously integrate my Twitter feed, when I call a particular leading airline to voice my opinion about being stranded in Chicago, they would know already. And they would know I'm angry because they would have gotten a sentiment score about me. And as the phone rings at the call center, it says, oh, he's upset. He's been tweeting from O'Hare Airport for an hour. And it's those types of little functions that allow you to optimize your business and treat your customers differently.
And they should presumably also know that you're a frequent flyer and that you've been using their service for a couple of decades, and they might be risking losing you as a customer right now if they don't pick up the phone and figure out a solution for you.
Yeah, it's you don't want to come off with the who I am sort of thing on the phone, but it's nice when the person on the other end knows that I've flown over 2 million miles on that airline.
Right, exactly.
And it helps at least them to understand the importance of a customer, as opposed to a tourist flyer who flies them once.
Right, and that's that calculation we call it lifetime value of a customer, right?
Exactly.
It's like they go back, it's like, oh my goodness, look at what we've made from this guy over the last 2 decades.
I totally agree.
Yeah. And then you got to project it forward. It's like, what happens to our revenue stream if we lose him? Might not be so good. Yeah, it's interesting you pulled out the CI/CD thing, and that's one of the things that we kind of borrowed from the DevOps world.
Sure.
When Justin and Guy, who founded the DataOps.live company, when they first started talking to me, they're, Snowflake partners. It's like they kept asking, it's like, what is it that Snowflake customers keep asking about? And it's like, that was like number one is people like, how do we do CI/CD on Snowflake? How do we do CI/CD really with data was what they were really asking. It's like, we kind of know how to do it with code, right? We got Jenkins and we got all these other things that our developers know how to do it with the code, and they know how to put stuff in Git and do check in and check out and branches. But how do we do that with data? And that's why it's data ops and not DevOps, right? It's not. It's a little different and it's a little trickier, as you've been alluding to. The data is changing, and you've got to integrate new data. And if you're trying to make decisions in real time, with or without an AI, right? The data's got to be current. The data's got to be good. The data's got to be governed. How do we do that?
Yeah.
And that's really kind of where the concepts of true data ops come in and as an approach.
Right. And, and a lot of the decisions that you're talking about, these automated ones, are purely just rule-based, and they're not AI driven per se. They're just simply a good work process, and process is a big part of data ops, right? It's technology and the processes that you lay in there. DevOps and the agility that are around those types of things are kind of tucked underneath inside that world. Data ops. It's a good thing to have as a part of the recipe overall.
Yeah. So, do you think it's actually possible for folks to deliver value at the scale we're dealing with today if you're not adopting some kind of a data ops approach or mindset?
No. Next question. I mean, but it goes back to what I said a minute ago. I think back in the day, we had a lot of opinions about what you should do with data to speed your environment and to do things right. It really feels fact-based to me at this point. It's like, if you don't, you can't. And it's very simple. If you have half, then you kind of get half. It's what you put in is what you get out. And data ops I think it's a critical component of a high-speed, impactful business that's dependent on being data-driven and analytics-driven.
Right, and driving that with at least parts of it with some form of automation.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Trying because I know people that are still out there trying to do it manually. That you've got data engineers that are manually doing check in and check out and going through manual checklists and processes and executing their tests manually. Which of course means that sooner or later those things aren't going to get run, right? You're not automated regression testing, right? It's not just doing some regression testing and remembering, oh yeah, I probably should go check that because we had a new load of data yesterday, so we probably should go run a couple of tests just to be sure. Oh no, that should be happening automatically. And
exactly,
the business, part of the self-service and collaboration is the business person ought to be able to look and say, is there a data quality score? Is there some sort of monitoring that says, yeah, okay, data loaded 24 hours ago, check. It passed all the tests. You can use this data with confidence, right? If you're doing a self-service platform. One of the things I wanted to point out on the self-service thing is that when we first started talking self-service, which was probably a couple of decades ago now, people thought that meant just giving everybody access to all the data to use whatever tool they wanted. And that's not what we're talking about here, right? Yeah. Dan Lindstedt used to say, let's at least say managed self-service. It's not a free-for-all. It's not the Wild West. We're not just, giving people a SQL tool or even giving them Tableau or Power BI and a login to a database. That, that's a recipe for disaster, for people to start using data that they shouldn't be using, exposing data they shouldn't be exposing, or even, the classic, oh, I want data. Oh, there's some columns here. Here's some columns here. Put it on a report. Oh, wait a minute. There's no good join between those tables. And it runs all weekend, eats up your entire compute budget. Say you're running on Snowflake, and it just, the cost is through the roof, and it never returns anything. Well, why? Because that happened to be a 10 billion row and a 20 billion row table, and you just cross join them, and it's just,
It's
not
good if
happening.
you run those at 4 p.m. on Friday night and then go home for the weekend.
Right,
And
right, right.
you know,
And run them on a single cluster,
yes,
right?
yes,
So
that is the
there's no
strategy.
parallelism at all, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that and so I think that's a clarification point. So um, I guess next up, just want to ask you before we close out here, Shawn, is like, what's up next for you? Are you going to be speaking at any conferences or meetups or anything here, with or without Bark in the next couple of months?
Yeah, I just this last week hosted a really fun roundtable on LinkedIn that people can find in my profile, and it was this idea of modernizing cloud stacks to impact and intersect with AI. I'm on my way to Germany in a couple of weeks to speak at the Bark Data and Analytics Retreat just outside of Frankfurt. It's a wonderful sort of invitation-only event with about 40 participants, all software executives. It's a great networking program run by analysts, and should be fun. And then after that, I'm going to pop over to Amsterdam on the 12th and speak at an event about AI innovation. So you can tell what topics top of mind for my world right now.
Oh wow, great, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Kind of a short show. I knew it'd be hard for us to cram a lot in, but we did manage to cram quite a bit into the 30 minutes. Thanks for being on the show today, Shawn. Thanks everyone else for joining. Be sure to join us back here again in 2 weeks when my guest is going to be the self-described hardcore data nerd from the mean data streets, Chris Taub, who's the co-founder of Leap Data. They were the Snowflake SI Partner of the Year for EMEA last year. So be sure to join us for that. Also, make sure you go out and like the replays of our podcast here. Tell your friends about the True Data Ops podcast. And don't forget to check out TrueDataOps.org, where you can sign up for notifications so you don't miss any of the future shows. So until next time, this is Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior, signing off for now. Have a great week.